Yes. And I will give you a host permission so you can admit people.
Thank you.
Perfect. And now I will start sharing my screen. Just give me a second. Okay, can you all see my screen? Perfect. So, as mentioned before, today we're talking about design thinking. But before we start talking about design thinking, I want us to first define what we mean when we use the word design. So I would love to hear from you. What are the first words that come to your mind when you think of the word design? So this can be a brainstorming of any words that you associate when you think of the word design. And I'm asking this also because this can help us get a better idea of who is in the room today with us. And of course, there is no right or wrong answer. I just want to hear a bit about what you think, or you can also type it in your chat box if you're more comfortable with this. So any ideas? It could be, I don't know, maybe I hear the word design and I think of Gucci, like a designer brand. That's okay.
We have some comments here. Ivana said organized creative process.
All right, so a process.
And Tanvi says complex challenges and innovation.
Complex challenges, nice.
João from Copernic says planning, framing, beauty.
Planning, beauty. Uh-huh. Anything else? All right, I will give you a few more seconds to think about it, and I will come back to this in just a minute or so. As Susanna said before, this project looks into the topic of just transitions to sustainable energy. And of course, in this, we recognize the importance of placing people and their needs actually at the center of renewable energy projects in order to achieve a transition that is just. So today we will look at design thinking as a creative process or even a problem-solving approach that can drive renewable energy projects that are also socially equitable, and they can empower communities to actually reap the benefits of this energy transition. But we will also look at design thinking and see how it can help us define these energy challenges and reframe them in a human-centered way, which can serve as a point that will enable us to move on then and follow the process of creating solutions. So today we will explore at first what is design thinking, what are its methodology and stages, what are the benefits of adopting such an approach, and we will also try together to identify design challenges and rephrase them in a user-centered way. So I hope that by the end of this session, you all feel like you have just met a new tool that can help you navigate your own energy challenges and get them from the idea stage to action and implementation. So now I want to go 2 steps back to my first question. And I saw that actually I heard, I don't know if there are more in the chat now, but someone said sort of complexity, of challenges, of beauty, of a plan. Susanna, maybe you want.
Yeah, Anna mentions also beauty and practical.
Practical, all right.
And Lisa said art.
Art, very nice. So we see practical, we see art, we see beauty, we see complexity. The first reply we got, I believe it was process. And this gives me a great point, as the process to design is actually what is the focus of this presentation. And we think of design as a creative process which focuses on problem solving or innovation by designing for people and focusing on their needs. So the design process addresses design problems whose characteristics are that sometimes they are not apparent, but they must be identified. And neither goal nor obstacle are usually clearly expressed, and these problems are often multidimensional and interactive, meaning that it's very rare that any part of a design serves only one purpose, but usually it affects more elements of the outcome. So design thinking is a design methodology which is based on solving problems and complex situations through understanding of the human needs that are involved and by reframing the problem in a human-centered way. So its main characteristics are, like I said, that it is human-centered, it is collaborative, and it's a participatory process, and it's very much driven by experimentation and discovery. So it involves developing a deep understanding of the unmet needs of users, but in a context of a particular situation. So this way can allow for high impact solution to emerge from the bottom up. It is a process that can bring together what is desirable from a human point of view with what is technologically feasible and of course economically viable. And what I find very cool about this process and design thinking in general, and what made me a huge fan of it, is that by combining this with a systemic view of the world, so by looking beyond the events to patterns and interconnected relations, we can use design thinking to produce solutions that deploy regenerative actions, meaning that they can continue to affect both natural, social, and even technological systems and their links with each other. So now, before I talk about the process of design thinking, I thought it would be good to dive deeper into what are the benefits of using such an approach to address both social and environmental challenges, or even both. So design thinking allows us to develop and deploy responses that are context specific. So it allows us to find solutions that are based on responding to the needs, the causes of which are due to factors that are different in each case. It also encourages adaptability as it develops the designer's ability and our own capacity to adapt, develop, and transform ideas based on choices that are informed, as it allows us to continue gaining feedback and to review what's been happening and to constantly collect new information. It also brings solutions that are based on the users. As I mentioned before, the needs of the users are the main focus here, through observing the users themselves and their behavioral patterns. And of course, it can help us develop sustainable solutions as through design thinking, we can turn beyond just the outcome towards the value that is inherent in the process itself. And so we can develop and promote design proposals that not only respond to the needs of today, but can continue to adapt with us into this constantly changing and evolving environment. So design thinking is not just human-centered, but we can see it as a planet-centric approach as it faces and uses the world's complexity to develop solutions. Now, as a process, design thinking can be best understood as a system of overlapping spaces rather than just a simple sequence of steps starting from point A to get to point B. Overall, there are three main areas to consider, starting with the inspiration, which would be the opportunity that would motivate us to search for solution. The ideation, which is the process of creating and developing ideas and also testing them. And the implementation, which is the path that leads us from the project stage into implementation in people's lives. We can see the process as 5 modules, the 5 design thinking modules, starting with the development of empathy for users by learning through observation, through engagement and immersion, as we experience what the users experience in the specific environment, trying to directly understand and recognize the drivers of their behavior, to uncover their known or maybe even unknown needs, and to leverage these insights to create innovative solutions. Then we have the defining stage, which is where we formulate in a clear way the problem that we're seeking to address. Here it's very important that when we reframe our challenge, we use the knowledge that, of course, has been gained through the previous processes. And this is very important as this new point of view of the problem that we develop, or the problem statement, as we call it sometimes, can be used as the main framework to help us gather ideas and find the possible solutions. Then we move on to an ideation stage, where we take a step from identifying the problem towards exploring the possible solutions. And at this stage, the goal is to explore like a very wide range of possible solutions and try to think beyond the obvious ones. It's important to avoid criticism and try to think like out of the box ideas, and usually some very nice things can come out of this process. And then we have the prototyping stage, which is where we finally get to transfer the ideas from just in our mind into the real world. So here we are invited to investigate possible solutions by making small-scale models of the product. And again, here the prototype can be anything. It doesn't have to be an actual object, anything that has a physical form. So it can be putting things in paper, or like facilitating an activity, or developing a project. And these prototypes, of course, are most successful when people get to experience them and interact with them, as this is what we'll offer as a preview of how the users will behave and think and feel when they interact with the final product. Now, to be really able to make a decision about what idea we will develop until the end of this process, we need to move what we have on paper, of course, into the real world. But to do this, we can use like a limited amount of financial or time resources before we move on and we commit to a bigger investment. So we have the opportunity to make a lot of prototypes, a lot of testings before we invest a lot in the solution, and then end up finding that actually this was not working for us from the beginning. So the fifth stage here is the testing. So here, these low resolution prototypes are placed in the appropriate context of the user's lives. And this is a very important stage, as it can reveal that maybe not only the solution is not working for us, but even the way we formulated the problem needs to be revisited and reframed. So the results here again will feed back and help us to redefine one or more problems and reinform our understanding of the conditions of use, of how the users think and behave, and so on. So throughout this whole process and the stages I mentioned before, we keep going through repeated stages of what we call divergent and convergent thinking. So, but each step is, of course, less broad and more detailed than the previous one. So in divergent thinking, the goal is to multiply options. So we open up a process and we try to create many choices. But in the convergent thinking then, it's what helps us make decisions among all the different existing alternatives that we came up with. And it is what helps us and what leads us to solutions in the end. So during the divergent phase, new options appear, but in the convergent phase, it's the other way around. We eliminate choices and we make decisions. Of course, in order to go through all of these stages, there is a great variety of tools that we can use to do that. And now I have a task for you, actually. I want you to, using the annotation feature here in Zoom, if you are able to, have a go and try to draw like lines and show us which tools and methods you think are fitting or match or can be used at each of the different stages that I presented before. So I can give you a couple of minutes. Please unmute and let us know if you have any troubles like working with the annotation feature. It should be on your like tools bar, or view options, and then you can find the annotate feature. we can all have a go at this. Again, you won't be graded, there's no right or wrong. Well, it's your chance to draw something. All right. You can also take a mental screenshot of this, or actually we will share it with you later on, so there's no need. Perfect. So I will save you the troubles and maybe the stress of trying to figure out where the annotation button is, because that might be the case. For me, usually that's the case. So I saw just a few ones. Okay, the blue is mine. Someone said brainstorming can be used during the ideation stage. Prototyping for empathy can be used through the empathizing stage, which all sounds very reasonable. So now I will move on to the next slide and see what we can happen. So let's see what's actually the case. Ta-da! So there are no rules as to which method should be used at what stage. It's basically about what works for you best and what helps you get the information you need. So some of the methods and tools are typical to the works of designers, while others are closer to the ones that are used in user-centered design and have a foundation in social sciences. Let's say the palette of tools available is, in my view, unlimited. So it's up to you. And of course, as you familiarize more with the process and the tools, then the easier it would be to be more used to or have a bigger ease at deploying all of these methods throughout the process. So I talked a lot about the phrasing our design challenge or defining our design challenge. And the goal in this defining topic is to formulate a question that expresses a significant challenge, which is based on our understanding of the users. As I said, this is what will help us create solutions. So in essence, this design question that we're looking for expresses a vision to which we are invited to offer a design solution. So here it's important to formulate the issue in a way that creates this framework within which the search for ideas and the solution will take place. So we are invited to ask the question of how can we design ... so that something happens. And once you have this question, it would be time again to move towards developing ideas. And you will see that when this question is clearly framed, then it's easier, much more easier to come up with said ideas. So now again, I have a task for you. It's your turn to think of a problem and try and define it in a user-centered way. So I would like all of you to take a piece of paper and a pen, or maybe open a notes window on your computer if you're on it, or whatever works for you, and try to spend 1 minute just by yourselves to write down the main problems or challenges, or challenges that you have identified in the community you work with, or with the community you live basically, or you work with. So I will give you 1 minute to go ahead and do that. This can be a free brainstorming. You can write down as many as you want. It's for you to use. All right. I cannot see you, but I hope that you have a piece of paper and a pencil in your hands, and you are working and thinking on identifying the main problems and challenges you have identified in your community all the people that you work with. I am counting time, so I will let you know when this time has passed. It's just 1 minute. All right, 1 minute is up. So now, after reflecting on what the problem is, it's time to move on to a more convergent stage of thinking and try to narrow things down a bit in order to frame the design questions. So now I want you to go back to this paper and spend 2 minutes trying to reframe these challenges into a question that is based on your understanding of the people involved in this challenge. So like I said before, this question should have the structure of how can we design, develop, create, improve, get, use, so that something happens. So again, just to mention, like I said, you can always come back to this stage and you can always reframe the project question further down the road when you have more information. This is just something to get us started. And what I found interesting is that, in the beginning, this might look like it's simple, but actually it's a quite difficult process that you need to keep coming back to and reviewing many times throughout your project. So right now, just don't worry about getting it wrong or getting just the perfect question. I would ask you to write like more questions, like 4, maybe 5 different ones to get to the 1 or 2 that you think are the most clear ones or more specific ones. So now we want an amount, let's say. We don't want the one perfect solution and the answer to everything. So I'm counting 2 minutes. One example, how can I design a bus stop that, powers night lamps in my neighborhood? Or how can I something so that something? I see some people looking down. I hope they're looking on that piece of paper and writing down questions. Yeah, I'm not so good at keeping time after all. I would say 2 minutes have passed. Shake your heads if you think no. All right. It's okay. So now another 2 minutes. I want you to spend 2 more minutes reviewing your challenge questions and just try to select 1, 2, 3, if it's so hard to make a choice, that you believe are the most clear, specific, and distinct ones. So please do that. All right. I assume maybe you did it, maybe you're still thinking about it. But once you have these questions, then it's again time to move to a divergent thinking. So again, opening up the process and developing ideas. And you will see that when you have a question that has like a clear actor and action, it makes it more easy to come up with ideas because you have something like to guide you through this. You don't feel like everything is like super vague and I don't know what's happening. And for sure, if you get a good idea, don't stop at the first good idea. I'm sure if you were able to come up with one good idea, you are able to come up with many more. So now comes the time when I will ask for one volunteer, please, to unmute themselves and share with us what they have noted down in these 3 steps that I ask you to do. So one person to tell us what are the main problems they have identified, how they frame their questions of how can we so that something happens, and out of these questions, which questions did they select in the end as the ones that are more specific. So any volunteers? There's no judgment here. Maybe unmuting yourself and sharing with others can be helpful for everyone to start sharing and feel comfortable in this process.
Anna, just the question on the chat box. How can we redesign utilities in the Leeds Climate Innovation District to become more resilient? I think the very pressing question for Anna. She will explain.
Yes, perfect. All right, that's a nice one. And then we can try to see the process of this behind this question. So yeah, some tips maybe that can help you decide on which ideas to take forward would be to just try to set a set of criteria. And this criteria can be different in each case. For example, it can be something that needs to be doable in a specific amount of days or months or weeks, or something that costs less than a certain amount of money, something that engages up to a certain amount of people in a specific area or city, or just something that everyone in your team enjoys doing and you think it's worth it. So as we saw, users are involved in most of the stages of the design process, and we engage with them not only through verbal interaction and just talking, but they provide us with significant input, and they act as a main feedback mechanism, addressing this way the core of the process, which is the fulfillment of the user's needs. So throughout the process, we turn to users to gain empathy in order to get a better insight and understanding of their needs and their behaviors, for prototyping to gain information through their interactions with the designed object or experience, again to gain further understanding of who we are designing for, a new feedback on our developed concept or idea. And during both the prototyping and testing stage, we test with the users to refine our solutions. This can help us also make decisions and resolve conflicts about different design elements and reevaluate our solutions. Users can be approached and included in this process, both as like individuals that belong to a certain target group, but also as a group or a community that is being addressed throughout the process. So, as we saw, design thinking can help us solve everyday problems and challenges. And the very interesting thing about it is that it can be employed in various sectors because of its creative thinking approach to generating solutions that is pragmatic and systematic, and in the end result is acceptable to the end users. It addresses the design principles that set social well-being, accessibility, and safety as a very important goals, and it uses this dual role of the human as both a designer and a participant in the process. And this serves as a tool for us to understand, to collect information, particularly through the empathy work, the prototyping, and the testing stages. And this change, basically, this process brings about a change in the way we think, which affects both the way that we go about designing, but also our perception and our understanding of the consequences of the decisions we make through the design process. So I think that the social challenges, but also the challenge of a just energy transition, requires these solutions that are systemic and they are grounded in the human's needs. So yes, I encourage everyone to have a deeper dive and look at design thinking in this process, and to try to find different examples of how this can be deployed. And we will hear a nice one now from Anne. So yes, we will be sharing this presentation with you. So I have here some further resources that you can take a look at. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kat. Super interesting. I think we'll open just a couple of minutes of questions. Are there any pressing questions right now? Or we will otherwise save some space in the end as well. We want to be mindful of time and that Anna is on a tricky situation with her internet. So if there are no questions now, we can move on to Anna. And thank you so much for joining us. Anna is a good example of exactly what she's talking about today. Anna's been a good friend, a close friend of Sane for some years, I mentioned in the beginning. She's now also an advisor, so she's helping you with a number of different things along the way, including proposals, including the proposal that ensured that we got funding for this project. So thank you, Anna, for all this help. I don't want to dwell too much on your bio, but just to say that you have quite an interesting path behind you from the PhD that you did at Queen's Belfast University, where you focused on how design thinking can be used to design participatory community projects in the Gambia and Africa, which is a super interesting project that I guess people can read about elsewhere and watch about elsewhere, to the work that you're currently doing, at least back at university, and also the work that you've done previously with Friends of the Earth, the Scotland part, and the Community Power, which is a project that I think was aiming to speed up the transition, mostly focusing on community-owned projects, and how we can speed up that uptake by communities. So yeah, over to you. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much for that intro. I'm going to try and share my screen. I had just had to, so this is all will become clear. I just had to basically run across to my neighbor's house who has 5G because he's a computer whiz, and because the Wi-Fi in our entire district just went down. So nobody has Wi-Fi anymore. Now, if you in a second can see my presenter notes, then do let me know and I will. Actually, can you see a full screen? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Full screen.
Okay, I think that's fine. I think nobody can see my presenter notes, including me, but that's okay. I roughly know what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm a reader in design at Leeds University. And so I'm a design researcher, and actually most of my research is really looking at energy and water scarcity in the global south. But today, as part of this masterclass, I thought it'd be nice to talk about something it's close to my heart. It's based where it's a project that I'm involved in. That's exactly where I live in a new housing development called the Leeds Climate Innovation District. So I moved here about 3 years ago when there was probably about maybe 60 people or so already living here. I think there's now about 150, 200. It's constantly growing. And I think, so we were already living in the city, but what really appealed to us is what some of our neighbors have also said. I've captured a couple of quotes here. We love the look of the house. We have a rooftop. It's amazing, so you don't get that really in the city centre in the UK, in the north of England. It just doesn't really happen. There was something really nice about moving into a place that kind of thought about climate change from the get-go. So the houses are supposedly built in a really energy efficient kind of manner. And yeah, we really liked that, the promise of reduced energy bills, and yeah, it all sounded really good. And there was also something around the fact that we would have community-owned renewable energy. I'll get back to that in a second, which, I was like, this is exciting. It was much more green than where we were before, which was slightly more central. And there was something about living in a community. So I grew up in a really small village, but there I'm related to everybody, whereas here I have that same feeling of community, but not everybody is my cousin, which I quite like. So so that was the kind of that. I think that was really the motivation for us to move here and be part of a kind of community that cares about the environment, cares about climate change, and I just looks after look after one another. And so when I say community, there's a couple of things that feed into that. So first of all, the developer promised that they wouldn't sell any of the houses to investors, so that all houses, there's also flats, and all the properties would be basically owner occupied. And I think that in itself, is quite different to what we see elsewhere in the UK, in sort of big housing developments, and kind of builds this sense of community to a degree. The other thing is that when the development is finished, we will actually take over as residents, as owner occupiers, we will actually take over the land that the development is built upon, including additional assets that the development comes with. So, so assets, include the land, there's a bridge, it's things like water infrastructure. So what you see here to the bottom right is like everybody has like these little drums outside their houses because we collect rainwater. But I think more importantly, it's not quite finished yet because it's still a building site. To the left, you see like a sort of what's the beginning of an sustainable urban drainage system. So when we have heavy rains, which we do have because we're in England, there's somewhere to kind of collect that and then slowly release it into the river that we're next to, as opposed to basically, causing flooding. Public walkways, there's some fun and I would say slightly controversial infrastructure. So we have some public netting that people like on. They're my students that came for a visit. I went on a trampoline this morning just, to show what that's like. Slightly bonkers, slightly mad, but okay. And then we also have energy infrastructure. So we actually operate on a mini grid, but we buy most of our electricity in from the national grid. So we have our own grid, and with that we also have solar installations on some of the roofs, so not all of them. To the left is like one row of houses where solar is located, and we actually all share, goes into the same grid. So it's not like somebody has the solar on their roof and only they benefit, it's shared across the kind of system. And then we also have just other infrastructure such as street lighting, which we will also be responsible for. And that sounds really great. I think, however, it is a developer-led top-down site, basically. And so at the moment, I would say there's a kind of disconnect between wanting to do, as residents, wanting to be an active participant in doing something on climate change, and basically just living here. And I think there's mainly two reasons for that at the moment. We currently don't have any say in any of the decision making. So because we don't own the site yet, we just live here. And also as a collective, I think we don't have sufficient understanding of not just how the site works or how the technology works and the legal structures behind that, but also how we ourselves kind of consume energy in relation to household electricity, communal electricity, and even transport. So we have electric car charging, for example. And so I don't know if you've ever been to any sort of eco developments anywhere. I kind of feel like when I have visited something, they're always researched, normally by people who don't live there. So one of my neighbors and my neighbor Nick, who did his PhD on cycling, he suggested, why don't we actually just, why don't we do some research? So he did his PhD on cycling and gender, very much from a quantitative kind of data-driven point of view, whereas what I do is much more qualitative, kind of looking at lived experiences and sort of interviewing people and things like that. So here are just some more pictures. So this is kind of roughly our design journey, if you like. And actually we're only in the first half. So we're currently still in this process of exploring everyday mobility and energy practices. And I'll get back to that in a second. And then we want to define our kind of design challenge questions through that. And then we will use that to run an informal community workshop to generate actual ideas that we can take on as residents in relation to our climate response. And then I think we'll depends what we come up with, the next month to years, basically prototyping and delivering that. So we're in that first half of our design thinking process. And so in the discovery phase, as a researcher, I always think it's really important not to just look at something from one angle. And so I like to triangulate bits of information. And so I'm doing the kind of semi-structured interviews with people with households. Actually, I've just finished them. So we've done about 20 of those. And then Nick will do some follow-on looking at kind of travel data specifically, how far people travel and what mode of transport they're using. And then we also asked a couple of our colleagues at the university who work in our planning department just to give a little bit of input around, what's the bigger planning policy sort of picture in the city, which, neither of us are really familiar with. And so that is really, so that's the research that underpins that. But I think from a design thinking point of view, what's really important is to have at least one research element that's really grounded in people's experiences. So that here, in this case, that's the semi-structured interviews. So yeah, what was I going to say here? All right, yes, we're going to talk about, I think it's just, I'll focus a little bit on the interviews. So that's one of our neighbors and his dogs. So we thought about, okay, who do we interview? You know, so the site is constantly growing. There's literally the last 3 weeks, there's probably about 40 people that have moved in. And we basically thought, okay, we need to speak to people who have lived here at least 1 year. So the longest occupants are probably 3.5 years. So, you know, if we have people who live here a year, then at least we have an entire kind of season. You know, people have experienced summer, winter, everything in between, and therefore they will be able to talk about both how they use energy and their experiences of public energy, such as street lighting, as well as, you know, how they get around, so in their sort of day-to-day life. We also wanted to make sure that we talk to people in different house types. So there's currently within those people who've lived here for at least 12 months, there's about 4 or 5 different types of houses. And then, of course, we have different types of people. So we looked at gender to get a sort of gender balance in those interviews. We also looked at kind of basically the status of your household, you know, who lives there. So is it multiple single adults? Is it couples? Is it families? You know, is it older retired people? You know, people with young kids, people with dogs, pets, big thing since COVID, and does actually influence how you use energy. It's quite interesting. So that's the kind of what in academia we would call sampling, but it's just thinking about, you know, who are the stakeholders and are they all represented in that kind of research that we're doing. The interviews themselves, they're actually divided into 4 parts. The first part was really kind of straightforward. Can you just tell me a bit about your motivations for moving here, to ease people into that kind of conversation? The second part was all about mobility. How do people get around? And then the third part is a sort of electricity focused section. And then finally, we kind of asked people to step back and just think about, in a few years down the line, how would you imagine, you know, living here, and what are your hopes for kind of energy, mobility, electricity specifically? So that kind of gave us a nice overview of where people maybe want to go, and also actually some concrete ideas already that we might, you know, sort of use. The questions that you see here, they are, so in bold, you have the key questions. The rest are just prompts, you know, because we are insiders, so we kind of know, you know, what to look for. And that was really useful because we could sort of, because we know nearly everybody who lives here, and we could say, yeah, but what about, you know, you also do this thing. So they're just kind of prompts. And then the first few questions deal with basically electricity in relation to the household. And then towards the end, it's more about electricity in the community. And then in the middle, there's something somewhere around actually also the different seasons, you know, how your behavior or how your sort of day-to-day life changes with different seasons, which, as I said, is kind of important where we are here. Okay, so now that's all fine. So we've done the discovery, and then what do we do next? You know, so this next bit that we're kind of now sliding into is our define phase, if you like. And yeah, and so I really like the use of personas as a tool for helping to define kind of what the challenges are, but in a way that's really empathetic. And so a persona is essentially a fictional character, but it's a character that's based on real human insight. That's the really important bit. Also, you're not turning, for example, one interview or, you know, one conversation with one person into one persona. You normally group the kind of themes which are coming out of the information that you've gathered and turn them into one persona. So it represents a group essentially. You know, I think in Katarina's presentation earlier, I talked about empathizing, you know, so that's really important. And actually, a nice way of doing that is to bring in some real quotes. So you're not revealing the identity of an individual, and you might have quotes from different people, but actually it's just it makes it feel more real when you're using people's own words. And essentially he described what somebody does, so their practices, any challenges that they have, and maybe concerns or aspirations for the future. Personas can also be used to, can be quite useful, I think, to talk to external people. So if you have a project in mind, you can say it represents these types of people. And it's really useful later on in the design, kind of in the ideation, actually not so much in the ideation, later on in the kind of, you know, when you're developing ideas and you're prototyping them and you're like, do they actually fit the persona that I'm trying to, you know, that I'm trying to support here? So we literally just got our interviews, and so, you know, this is not any of our final results. I've just kind of last night gone through some bits to take something out. And so you give your persona a name. That's step one, you know, a name and just basic information about the person. So we have lots of people who work in IT, ironically, given the fact that, you know, internet is such an issue where we are. So Mary, she's an IT consultant, she's 33. And then the first sentence is basically just a short description about her. Mary lives in the Climate Innovation District with her partner, Mark. She mainly walks into town instead of cycling. She says, I'm not very confident on a bike and we haven't got space in the house to store it. So that next sentence is basically something about, you know, what she does and how she feels. And then the third paragraph in this case talks about, I guess the opposite of aspirations is more what she thinks she will do in the future, which in this case, in fact, I'm thinking of selling my bike because I don't use it enough to warrant the amount of space it takes up inside the house. And if I had somewhere secure outdoors to store it, then it would be fine. But because it's inside my house, taking up space, it just feels not worth it. So to me, that's really shocking, you know, in a way that we have people in the Climate Innovation District, you know, low carbon travel and all, who are like, actually, we're going to get rid of our bikes. But actually, it's not surprising because this is our secure bike storage. So we've had, in our house, we've had 2 bicycles stolen, I think across the site, lots and lots, I don't know the exact numbers, 30 to 40 bicycles in the last 3 years. And it's really filthy and it's difficult to access by bike and it's shared with cars, you know, so it's not easy, it's not secure. Why would you want to have a bike? And clearly that's a very unloved bike that somebody left there. And so it's quite easy to then turn that into, to take out that one little bit of the quote, you know, and if I had somewhere secure outdoors to store it, and turn that into your challenge question. So how can we get the developer to install secure bike storage? That's been, you know, people have been lobbying for that since they moved here. But actually, you know, and I already kind of knew that, but actually doing the interviews revealed other insights that despite the fact that I live here, I had never really thought about, but that came up time and time again in the interviews. And so this, I'm not very confident on a bike, that kept coming up in relation to people cycling on the road, just getting on a bike, some people not being able to cycle. And so, you know, that actually all of a sudden broadens what we might, maybe broadens what we want to look at, or shifts our design challenge question. And maybe one way for us to decide what we do as a community is where we have agency. Bike storage at the moment is difficult because we don't really have agency to do anything because we don't own the land. But how can we support residents to become more confident cyclists? That's a completely different way of looking at the same challenge. And actually, if we had secure bike storage, but 50% of the community don't want to travel by bike because they're scared, then the bike storage isn't going to help us with that. You know, so one example. Jack, retired, 65. Jack and his wife Tracy moved into the district when he retired. Reflecting on the on-site renewables, he says, I love it in principle, but lack of transparency or the mystery of the input from solar panels leaves him wondering what the benefits are. Thinking about the future, he says, you know, we would like to get an electric car in the future. So that's one of our hopes. So we'd be able to install an electric charging point in our parking space. And I think that it would be nice to see more solar panels added on our houses, you know. So I guess, again, we can talk about how this idea of, I think it would be nice to see more solar panels, the infrastructure bit, you know, when we talk about community energy, that's always what we think about, infrastructure. How can we get more land to increase generating capacity of on-site renewables? Great. But equally, this idea of the mystery of the input from the solar panels, you know, actually there is a real sense of people not knowing what we actually have and how it works and what they consume and what that means for their energy bills, to the point where I interviewed one person who didn't actually realize that they had solar panels on their roof. So there's this massive discrepancy between where we are in relation to, yay, living in the climate innovation district, and actually what we know, what our understanding is of where we are, let alone being able to influence that. So how can we get residents to better understand our energy systems? You know, might be one way, maybe that's too broad still, you know, but it might be one way of framing that to kind of generate ideas that are around, you know, improving energy literacy at household level, at community level, creating something that people who come and visit the site, you know, are able to use to understand how the site works, etc. So, yeah, so I just wanted to, so this is kind of where we're at, you know, so between this discover, define phase, and then we will use that information, as I said earlier, to basically run a community workshop to really think about, you know, to actually probably reframe some of the questions that we're presenting, and then start generating some ideas, and then probably make some decisions about, okay, what is realistic for us that we can do as a community who currently don't have any say in certain infrastructural bits, and, you know, and what are the things that we can just do, and what are maybe long-term things. But for me, I would suggest it's quite important to keep the divergent and the convergent bit sort of separate. So if you can, I would suggest to do a brainstorming question. Have your question, use it to brainstorm, and then a day later come back and then make decisions about, actually, that doesn't really work, or that's a bit silly, you know. So try not to sort of mix them up. I think that's important. And so, yeah, and so this, what I've just presented, basically just shows you how you can turn some actionable insight into your design personas and use design personas to also help you formulate those design challenge questions. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna, for this.
Do you know how long that was?
I have no idea. I'm going to cut you off. So we haven't started. So we haven't done that yet. So I'm not going to start with you. Thank you. Super interesting to know. It doesn't happen often that you're actually doing research at the place you live. And so you have this double window into it, which I think is quite interesting. And I guess your stake in it, right?
Yeah, and it has sort of benefits and probably also challenges, you know. So in the sense that there are probably some people who didn't participate because they know us, but equally, I think it was very easy for us to get participants because, you know, and get interest because it is us who are doing it, and because we have some insider knowledge, you know, I'm able to say, but hang on a second, you also, you know, you're also involved in this blah 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 project over there, you know, tell us a bit about this. So because we know each other so well, I think that's a real benefit. And like you said, yes, I have a total stake in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was curious about, I don't know if there are any questions. I'd like to open up a few minutes for questions. If there are any, please, you could either just, you know, open up the mic, you know, may or may not turn on your video, or just write them in the chat box and you can read them out loud. So feel free now to ask questions to Anna about this particular experience she's having, because this is still ongoing. So basically the process hasn't finished. Actually, Anna was asking that if you could do this a bit later in a month or so, that she would have more insights. I guess we can do a second part at some point. But Anna also has a lot of insights and a lot of interesting knowledge from a project in the Gambia as well. So if you also want to know about that, I think that's also a possibility. I'm sure you're happy to talk about that at any time. I was curious about the progressive ownership. I don't know if that's what you call it, but I thought I would call it that. I've seen that happen elsewhere, including in Indonesia for small scale community hydro projects. And I find that it's interesting that is happening in Leeds. I was just curious about what has been the experience of that in practice, and when are you actually going to be owning your?
Yeah, that's a good question.
The third part of that question is like, if people actually perceive this ownership as an opportunity to take a bigger role.
So we all knew that it was marketed as such. We all knew that we would own the site eventually. And in fact, we had to pay a kind of a bond when we bought the house. A bond is like basically just a sum of money that basically secures our share in the land.
So
I think the vision is great. I think the practice is quite difficult at the moment for different reasons. So I would say that, on the one hand, because it's so developer-led and top-down, we don't really have enough information yet to even be able to take this on. I think that probably has caused a little bit of fatigue, where some people are like, oh, I just live here, things are fine, it's fine. Perhaps not sort of realizing the responsibility that one day we will have. Now, initially, I thought one day would be maybe 2 or 3 years. We've been here for 3 years. People have lived here for nearly 4 years. The site, there's probably a third of it that's built. It's an absolutely massive site. And actually, it will be divided into at least three community interest companies who own the different areas of land. And ours, the bit where I live, is the biggest. And also the one that has the most complicated parts in it in terms of legalities and, so like the trampolines and a bridge and all of that. What was the rest of your question?
Yeah, basically people see that as a plus or a minus, and when you bought into this, how long it will take until you actually have full equity, or you don't.
No, I think somehow, so it's marketed to people who are like, yes, community, great, brilliant houses, community, energy efficiency, blah blah blah. And there's a lot of expertise actually in the community. I think some people probably see it still as a benefit, that eventually this is it, because some of us have lived in areas where we don't own the land and we don't own the facade of the houses and the challenges that brings with it. I think there's also quite a lot of worry about the level to which things are finished and what does that mean if something isn't finished properly now. What are the implications for us in terms of liability when we do own the site? In terms of electricity, though, I think what is really interesting is that there is already, we were told there would be an energy cooperative. And there is a company that's a subsidiary to the company that owns the land, but it's not run on cooperative principles. We could change that. It is, however, combining electricity and ironically again data, so internet. So the company basically buys in both energy and data services, and we actually as residents get a better deal on data. And actually, we're paying under kind of less than, I suppose, market you would pay in a normal house, but we're still paying enough, and that means there's a kind of surplus, so we're actually generating income for our future sort of holdings, if you like, through selling data back to ourselves. Whereas on the energy side, we know that our part of the development, I think, will only ever generate something like 10%, and I think there's a bit of frustration about that, that why aren't we generating more electricity, and why does somebody have a giant roof terrace, and actually half of it could be solar panels, etc. So yeah.
Okay, well, this is an interesting, complex,
very complex
project. Just a last question. I don't know if there's anyone with a question, but a very brief one. Is this an imposition now by the UK government, or a recommendation that the project is being developed this way? So that a push towards community ownership
I don't think so. As far as I know, this is basically it. So we have people who've moved from completely different parts of the country, because this is kind of the only development that's doing exactly that thing, So there are other developments which are bottom up, which again have other challenges. I don't think I could be wrong, but I have not come across anybody saying, oh, this is now incentivized by the UK government. I think it plays into a market. So the majority, in one way, we're really diverse as a community. So we have loads of different nationalities, loads of different ages, and that's really nice. It's kind of like a really mixed community, mixed in terms of ethnicity to a degree. Socioeconomically, however, we are not diverse. Some exceptions to that. And actually we're plunked into a wider neighborhood. So this was basically a waste site, but we're plunked into a wider neighborhood that is of low socioeconomic status, and I think that's a real concern for people who live here, because it just feels very uncomfortable, that you kind of like this sort of, in England we talk about class, so middle class professional kind of people, and 5 minutes away are people who can't afford to pay their energy bills or feed themselves and things like that, so and I think for some of us, some of us I think are really interested in how, once the site is ours or even before, how we can actually generate some benefit for that wider community. And that could be through the energy model. So, kind of generating some income that then goes back to the wider community for other initiatives, but also maybe in other ways, sharing skills and stuff like that. So, but yeah, and unfortunately, the development, as far as I know, there are some houses or apartments that are maybe a bit cheaper, but I wouldn't say that they are offering affordable housing to families who live very close to us, who I don't think will ever be able to afford to live here. So that's not great from an equity, just from a social equity point of view at all.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting also in terms of contrast what happens in Portugal at the moment. We have very few community energy projects. Actually, we had someone from Copernic who had to leave a few minutes ago. It would have been interesting to get his view on this, because the few community projects that are urban based are quite different from this. So I think, and I think this is a model that I don't see it happen here anytime soon, but it's still a very interesting approach. And I don't know if you're going to have any sort of publication or way of sharing the results, because it'd be nice to see sometime what is happening with this. So please do share so we can
yeah, we'd like to write a paper. I'm happy to share it. I think, what we kind of, part of the reason why we wanted to do the research is to get us, I guess, more engaged as people who live here, but also because it's constantly still growing. There's constantly still people moving into finished buildings, and so there's an opportunity to really track what's happening from the inside over the next few years. So happy to share anything that comes out of it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I would like to see if there are any questions from anyone in the room. Again, even just writing on the chat box and I can read them out loud. Anything about Katarina's presentation? There was more on the principles and a bit of explaining the background and introduction to design thinking, or to Anna's presentation that gives a very practical example of how you can use these tools while a project is being already kind of developed, and trying to understand a bit better how to best frame it. Are there any questions? And Katarina, I know that you unmuted.
Yes, it's not really a question, so I don't know if someone else. You should put a huge pergola on the terrace and put solar panels on it, someone said.
I say that again.
That you should put a huge pergola on the terrace and put solar panels on it. Hashtag fight the system.
So, I mean, people have talked about this.
Yeah.
There is basically the land ownership also owns the facade. That's how it works, basically. So, and there's something in our lease that limits what we can put on our roofs, but it's been interpreted very differently by different people. And so, for example, we just have a small kind of orange man sitting, that I showed on the first slide. And apparently there might be some comeback on that's not okay. So we can't actually build a massive structure, even if we wanted to. But yeah, I think where people aren't using those. So once we own it, then we can make changes, so that's one of the things.
So this was from Ivana, I think it's pronounced. And then she continues, she says, a community green fund for nature-based solutions, for example, or establishing social support for lower-income residents could also be cool. Growing food for community meals. So
Yeah, so we do have some, you know, like for example, a couple of days ago, somebody organized a swap shop, and then the proceeds kind of go to a charity. So swapping plus I think some donations. Then we also do stuff like we have sort of food bank collections and things like that. I think the setting up a fund is a really good idea. And personally, I think so. In the UK, we have this community benefits society model, which is basically like a cooperative. But you have to ensure that some of the income generated goes back to the wider kind of community. And I think that would be a really nice way of actually, ensuring that every year, out of the money that we generate as through our utilities company, some of it is safeguarded to support initiatives in the wider community, and they should, as a community, we do have a kind of a resident-led kind of roadmap already of something that we want to do. So, it could feed into that, and some of it might be on biodiversity, some of it might be on energy efficiency. Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea, and I'm all for that.
Thank you so much, Ivana, for
the. I have one question, if no one else has.
Yeah.
Just before the question, I think that this social aspect, basically, and the relation of this new development with its surroundings is very tricky in a way for me, because this project reminded me a lot of design projects we were tasked during my university in architecture. Basically, a big piece of land surrounded by an existing houses that were usually of lower income families, sometimes not even legally built. But it was always this of how can we integrate this new development, But I always get the feeling in the end that we choose in a way not to touch upon this, or just say something impressive, but in practice, I had the feeling that that was not the case. Of course, within a semester, there's no time to do this. We were practicing on it. But now it's very interesting to see how this evolves, because it's already been built, a big part of this. So you're always, trying to figure where is relationship afterwards. I don't know if when it was planned, how much consideration was put into this. It sparked my curiosity. I had many thoughts in my mind as you were talking.
Yeah, and sorry, and I'm really not sure. And I think in my head, I hadn't really considered it until I moved here, and it became so apparent that there was this big kind of discrepancy between people who are moving in here and people who are living literally just there or there. There's a few things that have been put in. You see the bridge in the background. Mm-hmm. So the bridge is a new connection for people from both sides of the river, but it's not so easy to access still, because on one side it's still a building site, but now at least people can sort of get through, and that will, I think, make some things better. The bridge also hosts the district heating network pipe for Leeds, which on the one hand you think, oh, that sounds nice, but actually it's connected to an incinerator, but they don't call it an incinerator. They call it a waste recycling and energy recovery facility. But it's one of 3 incinerators in Leeds. We're building a 4th one, and it's plonked next to a poor neighborhood who get all the stench, get all the air pollution from trucks dumping rubbish, has a beautiful green facade on the side that you can see. And then the people who live there, who live in fuel poverty, they don't have any benefits from that pipe that then runs also through our development, which, yeah. So there's things like that, which I find really difficult to understand. And I think the connection with the wider community doesn't come from the developer, it will come from us, so and that's it.
For sure. And then my other question, more technical, is that I don't know when you joined this project development, when did you decide to buy a house there, basically, or all of these things. I don't know if the houses were already built, but my question is, because we talk about energy production, but I'm curious about the specs of the energy efficiency of the houses, for example, or the development itself, because I know this can make a big difference, actually.
Yeah.
Talk about more panels, but there are other ways.
Yeah. So, I mean, the walls are basically, the whole building is actually built in a factory just across the river. So the developer, they moved their factory there, and we recently were able to visit. That's quite interesting. So it's kind of like they're just made in sections and then put in. So in terms of transportation, you have very little kind of impact already, because you're just putting it, building it here and then plonking it in. So that's kind of cool. And so the walls are kind of super insulated with they showed us some sort of part of the wall. Maybe if you visit, we can go and have a nosy. They said to us, passive house standard. We've actually just put in new radiators into our downstairs floor, because we feel there's a big difference between the top and bottom. And the radiators that came with the house weren't good enough, and the front door didn't close properly for about 2.5 years. So it's airtight, but I can see light through it, or there's a leak coming in somewhere. So, there's different people have had different experiences. For us as a household, there's been some big problems with the quality of the build that also I suggest kind of impact this airtightness. So yeah, and there's also been some silly decisions where we have a nest. I don't know if everybody knows what a nest is. It's like a small sort of unit, looks like an evil eye that sits on your wall and measures your temperature, and you can I think link it to Alexa or something like that. So it's like a form of smart tech. But actually, so we asked people in the interviews about it, and lots of people don't really use it, especially in relation to heating, because or aren't happy with it, because in the first houses, so including the house that I moved in, it's on the top floor, so it takes the temperature on the top floor, but that's where it's the hottest anyway. So they've now changed that, and some houses now in the middle. So it's kind of things like that where I'm like, that it's not very, yeah. And our appliances are slightly lower rated than what we were told. Our immersion heater is like C rated, and there's kind of things like that where I thought, my expectation of what I bought and what I think I personally receive probably doesn't quite match up. But again, there's something about us as a community also learning tricks and kind of how we improve our houses and what works for different people. And that's one of the nice things, because you go into anybody's house, you're like, same house but different. What ideas can I steal from your house? So we do a lot of we share a lot, which is nice.
Yeah. These things make a difference one by one. You listed like a number of things, and one by one make a difference. Especially if they promise passive house standards, and I know them, they are very specific, even on the heating consumption. After that, there's a limit. So yeah.
So it's not passive house certified. It's built to passive. There you go.
The wording.
Yeah. Anna, there's another question coming up here from Elias. Did you consider community ground, river source heat pump, or community thermoelectric energy storage?
So as a community, we've had vague conversations. There's a plot of land where we thought, oh, maybe we could have wind turbine, actually, not so far away from us. People are sort of talking about, we could maybe have some hydro or not. And there's a weir not that far down the river. So I think I think one of the big challenges is where do you start when you don't have any decision making in even plugging something in, So, but there is a revived sort of initiative around community-owned renewable energy in Leeds. So Leeds is one of the few bigger cities in the UK that doesn't have any community energy, as far as I know. And so, yeah, I think, that will hopefully give some impetus to actually, think about storage, think about, how we use the resources around us, including the river, if that's feasible. I know that some of the new houses, they're getting air source heat pumps, which is interesting, so. But yeah, if you have any expertise on that and you want to come and talk to me and advise us, that'd be brilliant.
Elias, I think you have an invitation to go to Leeds. I'm just curious, I think we need to close because it's getting late, and I'm just curious, you've talked about setting up a cooperative. What's happening with, wouldn't that be the best way to just tackle this? Because, in time, when developer starts pulling out, and you need some kind of form of governance system,
Yeah, so we have actually, so we do have a tenants and residents association, and it's been not so easy, but also actually very useful in helping us, if you like, prototype some of the things that we do and how we work, or maybe how we make some decisions as a wider community. The legal entities, such as the community interest company and the utility subsidiary, which could be turned into a cooperative, they already exist. But the only residents that have any say in them are the residents which are also the directors of the company. So, you know, so, but I feel like there's a sort of move to some, it's becoming a bit more flexible, it feels. And maybe there's a possibility for us to actually get more involved in the energy side of things or the utility side of things, which is really what impacts us most day to day. And actually the bit that we really need to get to understand. And I feel like the developers now at a stage where they're sharing kind of more information, more proactively, partly probably because they're getting, you know, so many knocks on the door, but also because they needed to get, I think, some things lined up in order to actually be able to share things. So yeah, for me, in my head at the moment, that's kind of like the bit that probably we could feed into the earliest, you know, never mind the entire site and everything that comes with it, which is mind-blowing.
Yes, it is. It is. I guess the focusing on the energy would be something somehow more manageable for sure.
Yeah.
Well, are there any more questions? Thank you so much for the questions as well, Elias, Ivana. Are there any more questions for Anna's also left her contacts there. So I guess if you left them there, I suppose it's okay for people to reach out to you, ask questions, or even offer their services. We're going to, yeah.
Sorry, one last thing, just on the energy storage. So I just wanted to say this because it kind of all the links to what happened earlier when I was kicked off the internet, or the entire site was kicked off the internet, is that everything we do is electric, and it's basically a single point of failure. So when it starts, you know, there's some issue with the electricity grid, our electricity goes down, our water supply system goes down, our internet goes down. We don't have any alternatives. We don't have landlines or anything like that. So all of the basic services that we require, cooking, heating, talking to people, they're all gone. So having storage at least as backup for those types of systems to make sure that, you know, we can keep having water for a few hours, or, you know, or have street lighting or something. Yeah, it's really good. Yeah. We want that.
That's the big issue with smart houses.
Yeah.
I'm quite dumb because they don't have electricity. So
yeah, I just bought a coffee grinder, like an old metal one from like the 30s or something. Because I'm like, you know, I do this by hand, you know, because actually the houses that are really smart on the site. So there's not many, I would say, not surprisingly, not so many, but some people have gone all out, you know, smart light bulbs. You come in, you talk to Alexa does everything, everything is sort of, you know, and they really suffer the moment we have any outages. So
yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, very interesting. I think we're quite far from that down here in Portugal and in Greece as well.
Maybe that's a good thing in some ways, because this isn't necessarily working.
It's true. I think there's an upside to it. Thank you so much, and I think it was super interesting. Thank you so much for those of you that stayed until this late hour. I would just like to end by inviting you to share the call for applications that we have now just open today for the Youth Energy Academy that will take place here in Portugal, focusing on the just transition regions. I've just shared flyer and the link to the applications form. So please feel free to share it around. It's going to happen in Portuguese. It might be some sessions in English, but for the most part, this is focusing on the Portuguese just transition region. So do spread it around, especially our Portuguese participants here. Again, thank you so much. If you have the time to spend a minute just to click on the link I just sent before this, just to give us your feedback on the session, that would be really nice. We realize that there's going to be some issues with the registration platform that we might need to consider. I don't know if anyone experienced difficulties in accessing. I did, so I'm guessing more people did. But yeah, any feedback you have, it's quite useful for us to improve things in the future. All right, well, if there's nothing else, thank you so much, Katarina, Anna, for spending this late afternoon with us. And I see you
maybe some of you for the next masterclass that will take place in September. Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye. I think you can stop recording, Kat.